You're listening to a Soul One podcast.
So Taylor, assuming we make it through this episode, I don't know what to title it because it's kind of like today's kind of like a 2024 leftovers episode where we're going through like 4 movies that we didn't get to last year. Some of them have like big awards buzz. Like these might be really important movies we're talking about today.
I think at least 2 out of the 4 have award buzz. But we can't really say it's a retrospective or like a looking back because I feel like probably the next month and a half are all going to be or heavily weighted towards 2024
Yeah.
as we catch up for the award movies. Like, I saw that the screening room in Kingston got The Last Showgirl this week, or will
Right.
be coming next week.
Right.
That's one of my most anticipated.
It's a big one.
Yeah. So I think slowly I'll be catching up on all of these movies as they become available for rental. So that rules that out. You can't say, you had me at 2024 because it's going to be you had me at 2024 for the next month and a half. You could just say you had me at a mixed bag because I assume these movies are going to be a mixed bag, but I don't know. I think
on that title.
Yeah. You're like,
I think so.
Lock it in.
Yeah, it's interesting because, at least 2 of the movies definitely have awards buzz. And I would say of the other 2 I'm reviewing, well, you and I have a disagreement on whether or not I've reviewed one of these films already. So that'll be an interesting thing. I might be repeating myself. I don't remember. But yeah, I think there was a certain level of buzz and anticipation to most of these films that we're talking about today, which I think is really interesting to talk about whether or not they met it. And 3 of the 4 movies are definitely rooted in sort of the horror idea, like the different types of horror, but still sort of like the horror genre, more or less. Which, again, you like horror 24/7. I enjoy horror in the middle of the winter. I think this is the best time to watch horror movies.
I think especially, well, I guess I don't know why we don't normally tease the movies we're reviewing this long into the episode, but one of the movies, I'm gonna spoil it, I guess, Mike, is the long-awaited, or at least for me, the long-awaited Nosferatu episode review. And way back when they announced the release date for Christmas, you and I had a really good laugh about it because we thought, yeah, like, who's gonna go? All the goths are coming out at Christmas to watch Nosferatu. But Mike, it's a Christmas movie. It takes place during Christmas. So I think it's very appropriate that you watch Nosferatu in the winter.
Is it a Christmas movie, though, or a movie that takes place at Christmas? Because I still think thematically you have to hit a certain points to get to Christmas, you know? I don't know if plague and vampires scream Christmas to me.
And being eaten alive by rats.
I
don't know.
we gotta talk about some of these scenes, Taylor. We got to dive into it. I really like when we watch the same movie. Like I really do.
It's rare.
There's so much we can get into with certain cinematic moments in this one. So yeah, we got a lot to get into. We got some fan questions, which is timely and interesting. Some of them bouncing off of Conclave, which we talked about last week. So we'll do that. And yeah, four movie reviews. That's what people are going to get today. Aren't you all lucky to get so many movie reviews? Many technical issues. It's a great day. It's a normal day. It's normal.
It's typical for us that we're having technical issues, and it's the episode where we have the most movie reviews we've had in weeks. I think our I feel like our listenership is very divided, Mike. I think I don't have the stats for this. I'm literally just talking out of my butt, but I feel like half of our listeners here only for the movie reviews. Like in the old show when that comment we got being like, for those interested, the reviews at, like, minute 45 or whatever.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
you have these purists who are like, I'm only here for the movie reviews. I tolerate the banter. I tolerate all of the side comments, side conversations. And then you have the other half who don't really care about the movie reviews at all and are here just to listen to our really stupid opinions. That's the feeling I get, Mike. So this episode is for the OG fans who are here for the movie reviews because we have 4 of them.
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll just do a few fan questions to start, and then we'll get into our movie reviews. And if there's time at the end, we'll get to some of the others. We can shift them to next week. Um, we can do kind of all that. But why don't we just start with a few fan questions? Get the ball rolling. Banter stopping at 5 minutes is our shortest banter stopping ever. So as you said, the purist fans will be very happy
Mhm.
with this episode. So let's get into some fan questions here. So a couple kind of came off of Conclave, so let's begin with those. So Akil writes in and says, "Best adaptive screenplay versus it all just being screenplay. Discuss." So I guess Akil wants us to weigh in on the should best adaptive screenplay versus screenplay be awards categories, or are they all just screenplays? It's just best writing. Who cares where it kind of comes from? Do you have any strong opinions on this, Taylor?
That's a really interesting question because
This must have been because Conclave won, right, at the Golden Globes for screenplay, but it's a combo category, right?
oh, I didn't realize that. So Golden Globes
Yeah,
combines the two, but Oscar separates them.
that's
I
right.
think I I like that they're separate because I
Mm,
think there's something to be said about an original screenplay. Like you came up with a novel idea, like it's a brand new idea.
mm,
And it is a little bit different than adapting something that already exists. Like I think it takes, and I know people might come for me for this, but I do think it takes a different skill set or maybe a more like a higher skill set to come up with something completely from scratch versus those coming
mhm,
from a story. And I also think that it is sort of a different beast in the sense that it takes a certain skill to adapt something well and make it fresh and new. So I've never really thought about this, Akil. Thank you for this question, but I feel like they are separate categories because they are separate things and it's a different skill set.
I like your train of thought of it's not that one skill set's better than the other, it's just a different skill set. Like
Mhm.
the skill set of adapting pre-existing material is tough, but also coming up with your own story is tough. And they're different. And I like the way you're separating it. It's their to because I always see them as equal but different as well. Where it's the idea of um it's it's hard to do any of those things. I put it similar to acting. I mean, it's hard to carry a movie and be the lead, but it's also hard to make a massive impact with less time and less screen time.
Sure.
Um, and so I think it's just different. So I kind of like them being separate as well. And I don't think it's a slight against a movie. Now, sometimes it's a little weird what they consider adaptive.
Mhm.
Um, like I think one of the examples was Whiplash. The guy did a short film as like a concept for Whiplash to sort of prove it was possible, and then made it into a feature, and they called that adaptive screenplay. Where to
Yeah,
me, it's like, well, it's
that's
his idea. Just because he experimented when he was younger, like, why does that, like, like, who cares? Like, it's, you know,
I don't
I
think
get
that's an
that's
adapted
weird.
screenplay. I think and there's
Yeah.
sometimes where it's like it was based on like a paragraph of a New Yorker article. Like is that really an adapted screenplay? Like you like took 3 lines from a article like okay, that's stretching it. I'll put it another way, Mike. I feel like I could write or I guess I feel like I could direct if I was like the writer director in this scenario, I feel like I could do an adapted screenplay like tomorrow, but I don't think I could come up with an original story.
Mm, okay. Okay. I think
So
that's
like
fair.
my skill set
That's a
and like
fair
my
assessment.
interests.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an interesting question, Akil. Thank you for that.
It's good to know you have limits, right? It's good to be able to identify those. Um, Okay, this question is something that I think I brought up during our conclave discussion, but I can't remember, so we'll discuss it anyway. So this one comes from Bailey, and Bailey says, "Hi, you had me at Skip at Team. I just wanted to talk a little bit about conclave and one of the things that I thought was most interesting and impressive about the movie. So one of the things that I did not expect was sort of the internal politicking that happened between many of the Pope candidates. I didn't realize that one of the things that they would be taking into account is their own political leanings. For example, they were talking about a more liberal priest versus a more conservative one, and the idea of shutting down the more conservative one for some of the damages that they could do. Is this something that is realistic? Is this taken into place? I'm not really sure, but I thought that the dramatization of it was really interesting, and I really enjoyed this aspect of the film, mainly because I wasn't expecting it. And that's from Bailey. So, what are your thoughts on that, Taylor? I mean, I thought I brought up this, but I don't remember because last week was so weird with the different recordings and talking to you and Katie separately. But I also felt this way, where I thought that was really interesting and wasn't quite what I would be thinking if I was like, oh, I'm electing a new pope. I wouldn't be thinking about politics things. I'd be thinking more about like faith within that realm. So what do you think about that?
So um I'm again gonna like steal my commentary from my boss. Shout out, Father Quirk. But
We
because
probably should have just had him on
well,
to go over this
I
movie.
thought about having him on. I talked about it. Then I read the book and watched the movie, and I said, "No, I'm not having you on." And then he listened to last week's episode, and he said, "I thought you were gonna have me on." So he's like, I was a little put out. And I was like, oops, miscommunication. I
Wow.
thought we talked about you not coming on. So his I think what it's kind of it boils down to sort of inside baseball, I think is the word, like for people who are in the Catholic
Mm,
Church. It wouldn't be so much a political issue. It's different for American Catholics. Like American Catholics are very politicized, and it is sort of a right and left issue, and you do see that in Canadian Catholicism as well, but it's very much an American experience of Catholicism. And I think that's translated in the film because outsiders from the faith would boil these issues down to political issues, when in reality, and this is what my boss emphasizes, it's not so much political issues or campaigning, it's actually theological differences. So Bailey was right where she said,
mm,
is that realistic? Would it be more about like faith issues? I think for people who are not living Catholicism or like coming into it every day, I think it's easy for them to say that's like a liberal versus conservative issue. Whereas people who are actively living their faith, it's a little bit more nuanced than that, I would say. And it's less politics and more theology. But like you are gonna have a more conservative theology or a more traditionalist bent versus a more like progressive theology. But in like real life, like real cardinals, it's more of theological issues than the
okay.
overt political issues. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
So that was dramatized a bit to give us
Or
some more drama.
I would say that it's like they reduce theological arguments down to like political arguments because like
I
that's
see.
what the
Okay.
general audience would. And that's like my take. I don't want to put
It's
words
more
in the mouth of my
accessible.
boss. Yeah, it's more accessible. Like a general person isn't going
Yeah.
to know like the theological stances of Pope Francis
Yeah.
versus Pope Benedict. So
But they know what liberal means.
yes,
So that's an
exactly.
easier. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense. I also just I guess I'm one of those people. I just enjoyed it, that aspect of it.
Sure.
Because it felt real. Like everything just felt more real to kind of have that be part of it. So, yeah, it worked for me. Next question here comes from Stephanie, who says, one of the things I've been very curious about, and I've meant to ask, and I'm sorry if other people have asked this before, but why would you oh, sorry, that's not what the what what goes into your decision to read the book or watch the movie first? I'm a purist. So I've got to say that I generally read the book first, and then I'm pretty disappointed by the movie's adaptations, but sometimes I am surprised. So what exactly goes into your own personal thinkings on whether or not you're going to read the book first or you're going to watch the movie?
I prefer
Any thoughts, Taylor?
I prefer reading the book first. And I don't know if that's just because I like reading or I do often feel like the book is better. So I agree with Stephanie that often I'll read the book first, and then I think what it comes down to is if you read the book first, typically you are envisioning, like, you're imagining the story, you imagine what the characters look like you become emotionally attached to the plot line, and then so because you're invested in the story and the character, if you like the book, if you don't like the book, I think it's different. Then when it's translated to film, you have high expectations. It's like you're already attached to the IP, so it's like you have in your mind your own fan casting anyways because you've been imagining them for the past like 300 pages. So
Yeah.
typically I try to read the book first, but sometimes just like out of life circumstance you do see the movie first, right? Like maybe you didn't know it was a book, or but you haven't had time to read the book yet first. um but I think it really just boils down to, if you read the book first, you're just emotionally invested in the story, and so you feel like you have a stake in the retelling. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's it's hard because I do exactly what you describe where I fan cast.
Yeah, how can you
Especially if it's a
not?
book I really like. I know it's impossible. I don't know how people don't do it. Like I just and I can still remember um because I had seen the Harry Potter movies, the first 2 Harry Potter movies before knowing it was a book. Um so I then I think my mom got me like the third book and I read it. And that was the first of the Harry Potter movies where I'd read the book first and then saw the movie. And I remember when casting coming out and announcing of who's going to play who, there were times where I was like, oh, yeah, absolutely. That person. That makes total sense. And other times where I'm like, what? Like, what? Gary Oldman. So
But
it
Mike, to interject real quick, do sometimes when you watch the movie first, then like when you imagine the characters, you're imagining them as the actors you saw. Like it can happen in the reverse,
100%.
right? So like
That
Daniel
happens. Yes.
Radcliffe is your Harry Potter, probably.
Yes, 100%. And I cannot imagine anyone else because I saw the movies first. And the same thing happened with The Martian. I saw the movie The Martian before I read the book, and every time I read the book it's Matt Damon. And I even tried to listen to the audiobook read by Star Trek's own Will Wheaton, and still I can't imagine anyone but Matt Damon even though it's Will Wheaton's voice. So,
There you
it's a
go.
very yeah, it's a weird experience.
It can happen both ways. But I
It
just
can.
think I think for readers, people who like reading, typically you're probably going to read the book first, and that's why you become invested, right? So, I think that's a
Um
natural thing.
Yeah, I do. I do. So we'll leave fan questions for now. We can come back to more if we have time at the end. But I want to dive in to 4 movies that we're going to review because there's a lot to get through. So I think we should start with Nosferatu. We both
Mhm.
saw it. It's a good place to begin. And I think we it was on your top list, so I think we know how you feel about it. But let's dive into Nosferatu. What I love about this is it's coming from the perspective of you Taylor, a big Nosferatu junkie, a Nosferatu nerd, as we would say, and me, who have now seen this movie, and don't really know much about Nosferatu. So yeah, let's dive into it. What are your thoughts about Nosferatu 2024?
Yeah, it was kind of, I know, Mike, much to your chagrin, I kind of spoiled my review by adding it to my top list, but
It's
I
all
just
right.
felt like I had to. But
You have been breaking rules for
since
7 years
since
on
day
this
one.
show, so yeah, yeah.
So I yes, I guess you could say, well, more a vampire junkie than Nosferatu specifically, but I explained a couple weeks ago it's Nosferatu's connection to Dracula and to vampire filmmaking in general. I saw this movie maybe on the 27th of December. So it was just after Christmas. We saw kind of a matinee. Dan took me as my Christmas present. I knew Dan was going to hate it from the beginning, even before we went, but he's a good husband and that was my gift. So he came with me. So I had Dan on one side and then Mike, as most people know these days, you can pre-buy your tickets. I would assume the majority of people are pre-buying their tickets. Maybe not, I don't know, but I would assume that the majority are pre-buying. So we
Right.
bought our tickets in advance. We picked the back row. I on purpose picked kind of to the side. Like there was a couple other tickets in the back row, but like I picked in a way where I thought no one's going to sit beside us. It's a matinee show on, I think it might have been like a Friday weekday, whatever. So we sit down, and a family, like a middle-aged family, like I want to say like older parents and like their 50-year-old children, like it was a group of probably 5, and they sat right beside us. And I'm like, so already my movie going experience is a little bit put off because I'm like, this theater, there are so many seats. Why did you purchase seats? And like, I know like there were so many seats because like it's a Friday matinee. By the time the movie started, like there were seats. You know what I mean? Like, why did you? So okay, so already I'm annoyed. And they're sitting right beside Dan. So I said, Dan, like, come sit beside me. And like, so there's one seat between me and like a 50-year-old man. He was sucking his teeth. Do you know what I mean when I sucking your teeth, Mike? Like that noise?
Yep.
Yep. He
Yep.
he ate his
Yep.
popcorn and then proceeded to suck his teeth the majority of the movie. And he also under his breath was saying, "What the F? What the F is this? What kind of movie is this?" So, I want to preface my review by saying, this movie is not for the
This is fantastic.
so like my movie going experience was severely hampered by the fact that I knew, and I knew going in that Dan would not like it. I was, so you know when you go take someone to the movies and then you're like
Right.
just about whether or not the person is liking it. So already I have that. And then I have the
Sure.
middle-aged man beside me sucking his teeth, literally swearing under his breath. I thought he was going to get up and leave. So so my movie going experience, not an A+, let's just say that. But this movie, and I feel like this is very evident from the trailer, Mike. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it will also be, I'll be very interested to hear your review because you're someone who like dabbles in vampire movies, but you're not like attached to the mythology the way I am. So I'm interested to hear your review. You're different because you're not the average moviegoer. So this movie, and I think it is evident right from the trailer, this is not a movie for the average moviegoer. Yes, it's a commercial movie. Yes, it's playing at like a big like chain movie theater, but this definitely is not like take your 75-year-old mom and dad and your two 50-year-old kids who like maybe go to the movies once every 6 months. This movie is not for you. Okay? So don't get tickets directly. Well, already I knew they were not regular moviegoers by the fact that they bought tickets literally right beside Dan and I. Already that was a red flag. But so that would be the number one thing I want to communicate to everyone. If you are not into horror, if you're not into like auteur cinema, if you're not into the grotesque, if you're not into violence of any kind, this movie is not going to be for you. Stay home, skip this movie. Okay. Now the people who have left the review because they're that type of people, the people who are remaining, the horror freaks, the cinephiles, the people who love vampires, the people who love the grotesque, people who love art for art's sake, you will love this movie. This movie was beautifully shot, very well acted, except, and I'm always rooting for him, Aaron Taylor Johnson was the weak link in this movie. He definitely could have been recast. He was the only one who I was like, Aaron, baby, what are you doing in this movie?
He's trying so hard to make a career of it. Like
Yeah,
he's really trying.
he's trying. And like, I'm rooting for him. I think I want him to succeed, especially because he has a very strange family life. And I'm like, baby boy, I want you to be successful and divorce your wife. But he was definitely the weak link. You know what it felt like, Mike? It felt like a modern adaptation of Shakespeare when they set Shakespeare like in modern times, and then you get like these like
Yeah.
A-listers to recite Shakespeare, and it just sounds so weird and stilted and awkward. That's what it felt like with
Mhm.
Aaron Aaron Johnson, Taylor Johnson.
I I I agree with you. I think now this may not have been the actor's fault, but I had some pretty big issues with Nicholas Holt as well.
Really?
Yeah, now I think it was more, and the more I think about it, I think it's more I just didn't like his character in particular, for
He is always
reasons
kind
that
of
I don't
like canonically, I would say he's a bit of a weenie.
Yeah, which I understand to an extent, but I guess to me, Nosferatu would have been even more, um, intimidating if he wasn't always preying on what the movie would call, like, the weak.
Right.
And that's where, like, again, not that it was a great performance, but Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, I feel like it would have been better if that type of character was more who Nicholas Holtz was, a little more like matter of fact of the day, and oh, you're not
Commanding.
doing well. Here's some leeches, like straighten up, like it's
Yeah.
commanding and like what, and then have that person be manipulated and crumbled. Because I felt story wise, one of the things I was waiting for was Aaron Taylor Johnson's character to be destroyed by Nosferatu. Now, certainly mentally he did a number on him, but again, like this is nitpicking Taylor because I will say I liked the movie, but
Mhm.
my nitpick was Nosferatu went after children and the only two women in the whole movie, and like that was like and then he preyed on Nicholas Holtz, who was like this kind of like again weak bumbling one, but like the strong doctor and Aaron Taylor John's character, and even like Willem Dafoe, they never had interaction or encounter that was just I was kind of like, oh, but like why not? Why not have him go? Like he's so powerful. Why not have him go after everybody? And to me, that's at least to me, I was like, this feels a little dated. Like it's a little too I'm going after what people would call the stereotypical weak person, and that's who he preys on. And that caught me off guard a little bit.
That's that's a lot to chew on for me, Mike. I feel like uh because it's such a it's a very I would say a very faithful adaptation of Nosferatu, which is a semi adaptation of Dracula. So for me, the characterization is what I expected. And I didn't feel like it was dated. I just felt like it was, oh, they're
Right.
telling this
Of
story.
the
And
time.
it's like, it's interesting you mentioned how you're like, I don't know if it was Nicholas Holt, the actor, the direction, or the story, because interestingly, Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, which came out in the 90s, starring Winona Ryder and Gary Oldman. So Winona Ryder played Lily
Yeah.
Depp's character, and Gary Oldman played Bill Skarsgård's character. And then, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on his name. He's from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and John Wick.
Yeah, I was wondering. Oh, Keanu Reeves?
Keanu Reeves plays Nicholas Holt's character in
You're talking about Keanu Reeves.
Yes, Keanu Reeves plays Nicola Holt's character
What?
in Francis Ford Coppola's. And interestingly, Mike, he got a lot of pushback.
Wow.
He did not. He also had negative reviews for that movie, and so he also kind of stumbled from having a modern actor try to do like old timey dialogue. So I think that was part of it. He still kind of had his like surfer accent in that movie, but which he's grown out of since. But I wonder if people were reacting the same way you were reacting, in that like you're expecting this character to be um more maybe more commanding, maybe more authoritative, dare I say, even more masculine. And I wonder if that's what some of the pushback in the 90s was, is what you're experiencing. But again, for someone who has been immersed in this story and has been, loves the cinematic adaptations, to me, it didn't seem out of place. And I would argue
Right.
that everyone was at risk in the movie because of the plague that he brings.
Yeah.
And he did target Aaron Taylor Joy, or sorry, I'm mixing it up with
Johnson.
Anya Taylor Joy and Aaron Taylor Johnson. Very similar names. He targeted him in like a kind of like a roundabout way, because really at the end of the day, his number one obsession was with Ellen. Nothing else.
Yeah.
Like all of his
Yeah.
actions are just to get to Ellen. So like all those characters you're describing are kind of like secondary to him. Like he could take them out if he
That's true.
wanted, but because he has like tunnel vision on Ellen. So anyways, that's just kind of that would be my analysis. I think that's very interesting what you're describing. I think also the things that attracted the Ellen character to Nicholas Holt's character, why she felt safe and protected, was because of the character faults that you are seeing in him as an actor. Does that make or as a character? Does that make sense? Like I
Oh, it
think,
does. Yeah.
yeah,
And I thought story-wise they did do a good job of doing that. And again, like don't get me wrong, like certainly the like Lily Rose Depp's performance and that characterization and everything makes sense. And I think the way it ends was a very like strong turn for the character of her taking the power back of how this is going to end and all of that. And I like that. And I like the trajectory of it. Again, I judge this like I would any horror movie or movie
sure.
that builds tension. How at risk did I feel for the characters that I'm watching? And I felt very strongly that there were three characters that I spent a lot of time with who I never felt that their lives were at risk. And again, that was the Doctor, Willem Dafoe, and Aaron Taylor Johnson,
Yeah.
where I just never for 1 second thought they were at risk from Nosferatu. Now, again, you're saying the roundabout way. How he got to Aaron Taylor Johnson was, I'm going to take out your family and completely destroy you as a person. Which, again, as I think you're pointing out, I don't think Aaron Taylor Johnson has some of the depth that you
Yeah.
need to do that. Especially, I feel, when he's sharing the screen with someone like Willem Dafoe, who's such
Oh,
a
I felt so bad for
actor's
him.
actor.
I felt so
Like
bad for
he's
him.
so he's so he's which one?
I felt bad for Aaron being steering anytime
Yes,
he
yeah.
was like in the ensemble. You can just tell like he was the weak link.
Yeah, he was. No, and I think Nicholas Holt's a fine actor. I've seen him in lots of things. I think he's good. But again, having not seen this story and not having a lot of Dracula background, I actually think the voyage of the Demeter, that ship that we saw crash, is what I've seen. You know,
Yeah.
I've seen that movie. I felt very. I loved that. I loved that the ship, and having seen that movie and making that connection, I loved that. Um, but yeah, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was really well done. Was it strange and weird and different? Yeah, it was. But the like art, I can't help but marvel at the art of the filmmaking behind this. It was so well shot and put together and done. Again, I'm just saying, where does it fall for me? Um, I didn't feel Nosferatu was as intimidating as he could have been, and I felt the tension with Lily Rose Depp's character and the building of tension there and his sort of mind games with her. I definitely felt that. But I felt like there was always this safety zone of people that you could kind of follow. And for me, it would have made it a little bit more intimidating to take one of them out, and kind of see how that goes. Um, but I can see your points, and I definitely understand in terms of being a faithful adaptation. I think I appreciate that, and I'm glad I kind of got to see a faithful adaptation of the original story. I like that I kind of got to experience a modern version of it.
Before, I know we can't spend this whole episode talking about Nosferatu, although I would love to, obviously. Talk about the filmmaking, how he used natural candlelight to film some of the
Oh
indoor
yeah.
scenes, all that kind of stuff. I'd love just to nerd out about like the actual production. But the practical effects. Lily Rose Depp does her none of that CGI. All her convulsions are
Mhm.
practical, like in the last exorcism. And so, anyways, we can't get into that. But one of the most hotly contested things on the internet, or at least in my part of the internet that I dwell in, is the character design. Some people absolutely love the Nosferatu character design. Me, being of Slavic ancestry, I loved his character design. I thought it was chef's kiss. And then there's other people on the internet who thought it was the worst character design they've ever seen and did not think he was scary whatsoever. So, Mike, without getting, I don't want to spoil what he looks like because that is like a reveal seeing him for the first time on screen. But what was your take? Silly or good?
I would lean towards good. I did not think it was silly. I thought the reveal was not what I was expecting and different, and I liked that. I thought that up until the point of the reveal, Bill Skarsgård had done such a great job with the physicality and the booming voice and all the kind of different characteristics that I felt the reveal suited everything that came before. Especially this movie to me has a real natural feel and sort of disgusting lived in quality to it. And I feel like for the most part the way Nosferatu was designed works for me.
So is it a see it, a skip it, or a stream it for you?
I'm going to give it a see it. I do agree with you that I don't think this movie is for everyone. And I think it is closer to an auteur artistic piece than it is a kind of commercial movie. It does toe a line, I think, and I do think they do a pretty good job with that. So I do think that maybe some people, will be drawn to it who are more likely to go see kind of more accessible new movies. But I still think it's a see it because I do also marvel at the filmmaking and the quality and the work that was put in. It has its flaws for me, but I would still give it a see it.
And I think it's a see it for me. But I think what you brought up was very valid, Mike. I also saw some people complain that they A, didn't think it was scary, and B, thought the story was a little bit slow. I never think vampires are scary. So I, I wasn't expecting to be scared. So that wasn't an issue for me. There were some times where I was definitely unsettled, like some of the editing and like some of the, I would even dare say like jump scares, although they weren't like proper jump scares, but like some of the way he
Mhm.
spliced the footage definitely took me off guard. Um I do think it's a
Yeah.
slower pace film. And again, that's another reason why I think like your average moviegoer who's like expecting like a 2 hour, like nonstop action fest, this is not the movie. But all that being said, I think it's a see it. If you are into that kind of stuff, if you're like a weird little kooky freak, go see it.
Yeah. Okay.
Mike's like, all right, I'm out.
uh, the weird little kooky freak comment is reminds me of the only like criticisms I've read about the movie
It's like
that are
it's only
along.
weird kooky freaks are gonna like this.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay, so I'm gonna quickly review Beetlejuice, which is a movie
Speaking,
that Taylor you claimed I've reviewed of on this podcast already, but
I
I
was
don't think
I
I
was gonna
have.
say, speaking of weird kooky freaks with
Yes,
Beetlejuice,
I know we've
I
talked about this movie.
Mike,
We've talked about it, but I just don't think I reviewed it.
I am almost, and all of our very devoted, passionate listeners will be able to go back and fact check this for me. I'm thinking specifically of Tyler Vance, if he's not too busy with his child. And oh my gosh, he wrote in today and I'm completely blanking on his name. He had the question about
Akil?
Akil. I feel like Akil, um, Tyler and our producer will be able to fact
Awesome.
check Austin. I feel like they'll be able to fact check this for me, but I am 90% sure that you had did a full review of Beetlejuice.
I swear I didn't. I know we talked about it because I remember on an episode discussing the things that were in Beetlejuice because you had brought up, is this something we even needed? And I know we talked about it, but I don't think I gave a formal review. Like I don't think I actually gave up. Like there's
Maybe
no
I
rating, there's no record of it anywhere.
maybe I just read so many online stuff that I'm just projecting. But anyways, give a
Maybe,
very brief review just in
maybe
case you
we'll
didn't
find
give a
out.
review.
Beetlejuice is the follow up to the Beetlejuice movie, obviously. So one of the things that did surprise me about this movie, because I've also read a lot about it, I've read a lot of reviews, I've seen a lot about it, was I was really surprised at how the movie was. I could just describe it as just kind of fun to watch. Like it wasn't, there wasn't anything in particular about it that was so weird and all over the place that I had like a hard time with it. Because if you watch the first Beetlejuice movie and you liked it, I would say this is like a faithful follow up to it. Even down to the fact that Beetlejuice isn't in the movie that much. Like he's not in. I think I read somewhere he's only in 16 or 19 minutes or something of the first movie.
Hmm.
And one of Michael Keaton's requirements to returning was being around the same amount of screen time, like not to overdo it.
Smart.
Um, with Beetlejuice. And this movie like really really focuses on Jenna Ortega's character and like her relationship with her mother, who is Winona Ryder, who returns as the same character, and the kind of like how their lives changed post the ghosts, like because if you remember the first Beetlejuice movie, it's really about two people who died who are haunting a house, and then these other people move in, right? Like that's really what it's about at the end of the day. Like that's the main plot, and this movie is about this family dealing with like a death in the family, and it's about like Catherine O'Hara and Ryder and how their lives have changed based on all the events of the first movie, and Jenna Ortega not believing a word of it. Like just be completely like my grandmother and mother are nuts. Like that's basically how she views them. Um and it's so that's like the most interesting part, and that's what they focus on, and that's what makes the movie kind of fun and interesting. So I actually at the end of the day thought Beetlejuice was a pretty decent follow-up. Like in an age of really bad remakes and rehashes and sequels, this is not one of them. Like it's just kind of a fun modern continuation of the Beetlejuice story, and I don't think it overstays its welcome, and I think it kind of gets back to what specifically Tim Burton does the best. Like it's not overdone weird Tim Burton. It's like weird enough, but not the Tim Burton we've had for the past couple of years. Like it feels like this movie was made shortly after Beetlejuice, if you know
That's
what I mean.
valid. I
Yeah.
um what I heard about the movie was that it was a bit of a mess, that there was too many plot lines, that that was the major critique of what I heard of the movie was that people people did really enjoy it, Mike. Like I think a
Yeah.
large movie going population feel very similar to how you feel, but the people who didn't like the movie found that the plot line was too convoluted and they introduced too many characters essentially that they didn't need.
Yeah, I would say that the the plot line with sort of the boy they introduce is the most interesting, and they should have stuck with that a little bit more. Whereas there's like a corpse bride character, and then there's, speaking of Willem Dafoe, who's in this movie, there's kind of Willem Dafoe's character and what he's doing. You probably could have spent less time there. And I agree that it's a little messy. But if you watch the first Beetlejuice movie, it's also a little messy. Like it's so, like a lot of the criticism I heard was how the ending of this movie wraps up too quickly. Those people need to go rewatch Beetlejuice, because the end of the entire idea of Beetlejuice marrying, what's her name, Lydia,
Yeah.
uh, is only introduced in the final 15 minutes of the movie, and Beetlejuice is eaten by a sandworm like out of nowhere. So that's a similar sort of plot takes over near the end of this movie. So it's the same. And I think people put certain movies on pedestals because they watched it when they were younger and they remember it and whatever. But Beetlejuice has if you're going to make those claims, which I think are valid, you can make those exact same claims about Beetlejuice, the first movie.
That's,
So it's kind of the same.
that's interesting. So, what is
Yeah.
your ultimate review?
I'm going to give it a see it. I
Okay,
do think Beetlejuice is worth watching. I think it's a fun time.
cool. All right, maybe.
Taylor,
Yes,
why don't you dive into another awards movie?
Anora. So this movie is getting a lot of buzz primarily for, and I do not have my internet browser open because we're having technical issues today, and I'm afraid that I'm going to crash the whole system. So I don't know the names of any of these actors. Mike. I don't know the name of the director, but from what I can see, the lead actress and the supporting, there's a supporting actor who's a he kind of enters halfway through the movie and has like a minor supporting role. There's a lot of buzz around their performances. I
Yeah.
don't know how much other buzz, if there's directing, best picture, I don't know. What I'm reading is primarily acting awards, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. It might be up for best original screenplay, I have no idea, but um, so the premise of this movie is pretty straightforward. I would say it's sort of an update. It's a modern Pretty Woman, which is of course kind of a Cinderella story. It's a very quintessential Cinderella story. She is a 23-year-old exotic dancer and by chance she gets introduced to the son of a Russian oligarch because she can speak Russian. And so they develop a relationship and then very quickly get married. I'm not really spoiling anything. This is literally right in the trailer. And essentially, once they get married, his family finds out and shenanigans ensue. So it's considered a dramedy. So it's a drama comedy. And it's definitely, there's very like high drama, and then there's also like it is also very funny in parts. So I think they definitely, sometimes dramedies are like, it wasn't funny, like why are you calling that a dramedy, or you or they don't do the drama very well. But in this movie I think it's very balanced. My biggest critique with this movie, and I'm going to come off 100% as a prude, I get it. And people are going to say, Taylor, the movie's about a sex worker. Why are you surprised? Well, I've seen movies about sex workers that are done differently. So that's why I'm surprised. There is very explicit sex scenes in this movie. Like literally opening credits, full frontal nudity of women. So just that's the biggest warning I would give, is that like these are some of the most explicit sex scenes I've seen in movies. Um so that's my first critique. I think I'm of an age now, Mike, and I think you feel the same way, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm of an age now where unless the sex drives plot, I really could care less. Like I'm not 18 anymore.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a narrative reason for when you do those things, and I don't have a problem with it, but I do take issue to it. Just kind of makes me go when there's just no reason, like it's just there, and it just feels like it's there for the sake of being there, and that makes me think, oh, the filmmakers are immature. Like that's where my mind goes.
I know it's the same filmmaker who did the Florida Project, which also has a sex worker in that movie. So I wonder what his I wonder, that makes me think about him a little bit. But no harm, no foul. I think he has an interest in showing sort of maybe the underbelly of society. I actually really like the Florida Project, which also interestingly has William Dafoe in it, Mike. And I reviewed
Oh,
the Florida Project when it came out on this show eons ago, or I should say on the original version of the show. So you should go back to our archive somewhere and find my Florida Project review. It was a see it for me for that movie, I'm pretty sure. So this director is definitely interested in portraying, I would say, very really and like the nitty gritty of, you know, subsects of culture or society that maybe the typical person doesn't come into contact with. So you can make the case of like the sex is part of telling that story. She's a sex worker, she's young, she feels liberated, yada yada yada. Like I get it intellectually. I know you can make all those arguments and that's why the sex is in the movie, but I think you could also do what he was trying to do in a different way without being so explicit. So that's my number one critique. My
Mm.
second critique of this movie is that I found it, and I think it had a little bit to do with the sex. The first hour of the movie is kind of like the whirlwind part of the Cinderella story. And I found it kind of boring. It's like sex, drugs, partying, sex, drugs, partying, sex, drugs, partying. And I'm like, that could have been 20 minutes. Like it did not need to be a full hour. And then so I'm kind of watching it and I'm like, oh, I had such high expectations for this movie. And then I had to check. It was like at the 50-minute or like 1 hour mark, the movie did like a complete flip and it was so good and like so engrossing. And it essentially becomes like almost like a buddy hijink movie. Like the oligarch's son goes on the run, and then Anora and like the stooges of the father are like looking for him in Coney
Oh.
Island. And like it's just like kind
Wha-
of like a it's just like to me it was like I thought it was really effective, funny, like and then she gets like reunited. There's like a kind of like a the movie kind of takes another turn, goes back to drama. I thought they did that really well. And you definitely see this like arc or like you see this growth of the Honora character. I think the young woman who was nominated for Best Actress certainly deserves those nominations. I haven't seen her in anything else. You guys will have to Wikipedia her. She is in I think she's been in a couple TV shows and has been in a handful of movies, but I think this is like her breakout role. And she was very, very good. And the gentleman, the Russian actor who's been nominated for best supporting actors in a couple places, very well deserved, very well acted. Um, so this movie for me is very hard to give a final review of, Mike, like our typical label, because like I said, like the first hour, Mike, I feel like you could literally cut out the first 40 to 50 minutes and there would be no difference to the story. Or like,
Mm.
edit the first hour down to 30 minutes, say, and the movie would be just as good if not better. So um, I am gonna say that this is a see it for me. Huge caveat being like it does have very explicit sex, and I know like I don't think I'm the only person. Like an average moviegoer probably isn't expecting to see that explicit of a sex in a movie. So I don't think I'm alone in being like, hey, just full warning. So there's that, and then the other reason why I'm like, oh, I don't know, it's because I think that first hour is a little bit clunky. But I'm saying see it because of the second half of the movie. And then also because there is Oscar buzz around this movie. If you're one of those people who are like, I have to see all the movies that have been nominated, for me, this movie is a see it for that reason, but also that it's good enough to see. Like it's a contender, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Because I consider this a contender, this is when you're going to want to go see in order to like make sure your Oscar pool is like up to date. So, Anora,
Definitely.
see it.
Definitely. Okay, I'm gonna quickly give a review for Woman of the Hour, which I finally watched because it finally came to Netflix in Canada. This is the Anna Kendrick directorial debut, also starring Anna Kendrick, which Taylor, I know you don't like.
Mike,
So
I gotta interject so quick. I mentioned this like way, way, way back when we were talking about this movie. I read this article being like, she literally embodied, she admitted in her interview the exact thing I hate. She's like, am I gonna pitch myself to direct this movie? I guess I am. Ew. Like you think so highly of yourself that like the studio is dying to find a director. So like, I guess if no one else will do it, I'll do it. Like really, really. So I'm dying to know, Mike. Actor director Anna Kendrick. Did it work out?
well, well. Okay, for a first-time director, I thought she did a pretty good job.
Right.
Now, this movie is not without its issues. I think it has a pretty major pacing problem. Um, I think the scenes that are supposed to be creepy and supposed to build tension were well done
Okay.
and extremely well executed. There was a particular sequence that happens between Anna Kendrick's character and the killer that I did not know what direction things were going in. Not only did I not know what was going to happen, I didn't know what character knew what. Like it was so well crafted that and I do think Anna Kendrick is a pretty good actor, so I think that this is also an acting credit, but as a director, you have to be able to work with your cinematographer to come up with how to build this tension, how to make it work, the right time to cut and hold and etc. And I thought it was really really well done. So there were moments like that that gave me hope of like, oh, this is well done. This is an understanding of the craft. This is well done filmmaking. I do think this movie was not without its issues. As I mentioned, the pacing problem. This movie reminded me a lot of Zodiac,
Mm.
if you remember that
Yeah,
movie,
with
where
Jake Gyllenhaal.
yeah, where it kind of had cuts between here's the killer killing, and then cuts back to here's people trying to solve the problem,
Right.
and they're kind of like building up all these past kills. I didn't think that was handled very well because even the like kind of the realization of who this person was by someone in the audience, which happens near the beginning. This is not a spoiler, but that's essentially the tension of this. There's this dating show that's filming. Anna Kendrick is a guest on it, and one of the three gentlemen is the killer.
A true story, by the way,
And one
Mike.
of the yeah, you told me that it was a true story. I had no idea that this had actually been based on something that had happened. Um, and there's this sort of idea of this woman in the audience of the film of the TV show recognizes him, and there's tension being built there. That kind of doesn't go anywhere. Anna Kendrick's story sort of concludes and ends, but things to me didn't really escalate in a direction. And I felt like the biggest issue I had with this movie is our perspective kept switching, which is fine. You can have those types of movies where it's omnipotent, right? You as an audience knows more than any individual characters, but I didn't find the transition from perspectives smooth.
Hmm.
It was a little jarring and uneven and uncertain, and I didn't know where we were. I didn't know quite what was happening. So I felt like the movie was very uneven. With that being said, with all that being said, the thing I can give this movie credit for is it's an interesting story. It's told reasonably well, and for a first-time director, like it's pretty solid at keeping your attention for the full movie. Like I thought it really overall worked, had me guessing. I wasn't too sure where we were going with it. And I thought, again, like kind of similar to Beetlejuice, I kind of had fun watching this movie despite its problems. Like the story and the performance, and there was enough good that it overcame the bad for me. So it might not be like, oh, 10 out of 10, run to it, but it was still a pretty solid movie. And I have to also give it a see it, like a low see it. It's kind of on the low end of my own see it scale, but it's still to me it was really worth watching. Like it was entertaining, it was interesting, it kept my attention, and I thought especially the story of Anna Kendrick's character and her journey on this particular game show was in of itself interesting. You didn't necessarily have to add in the serial killer thing. Like they did a good job with that alone. So yeah, I actually kind of enjoyed this movie, which surprised me a little bit. So yeah, I thought it was well done.
Mike, this might be the first time in our history that we've reviewed 4 movies and every movie was see it.
Considering our track record, yeah, I think this is a we've done it. We've done it. This will be the final episode of You Had Me
See
at
ya.
Skip It. We've solved it.
We've solved
Yeah, I think this is
movies.
the first time that's happened. Yeah, that's true.
We've solved movies.
And hey, some of these movies they're just worth it. Save the best for last, and I think movies at the end of this year, for the most part, we're knocking it out of the park. Like some of these movies were really well done.
We're off to a really strong 2025 because historically when reviewing movies are it's a bit of a slog Well, no, that's a lie. I would say we always start off strong because we're always getting ready for the Oscars.
Yeah.
So I'll correct. But
We,
we're this
we
year,
hit our slog in February.
yes. But we're definitely off to a good start, which makes me think that you're not going to be able to name this episode "You Had Me at Mixed Bag" because it turns out these were all
Yeah.
see-its. So
Yeah.
do with that what you will.
I will. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening this week. We will be back next week with a new episode.
Go see some movies.
Thank you for listening to You Had Me at Skip It, a Soul One Arts Inc. podcast. This podcast is produced by Mike Shepard and Austin Spinner Summer. It is a project of Soul One Arts Inc. To learn more about Soul One and all the great work that Soul One is doing in the arts community, especially in film, theater, and other performing arts, visit soul1arts.ca. You can contribute to this podcast by visiting soul1arts.ca and going to the podcast tab. You'll find all the information on You Had Me at Skip It and how you can get your questions read on air each week. Thank you again for listening.